Greetings, Region 7 stakeholders. Good evening. I am Dr. Rodney Swanson, Region 7 Superintendent. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Comprehensive Master Plan Town Hall meeting. We're happy that you have joined us this evening for this very important meeting. Tonight, we will discuss the Comprehensive Master Plan and field questions. We hope you will be provided with greater clarity and a renewed sense of partnership with the district. At this time, Superintendent Cheryl Watson Harris will bring you greetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Swanson, and thank you to all of our Region 7 stakeholders. I do just want to take a moment of privilege and just say congratulations to Dr. Swanson. He is our Region 7 regional superintendent, but he's also the former headmaster or principal of Arabia Mountain High School, and we just received a wonderful, wonderful distinction from U.S. News and World Report for the high school rankings. And out of 24,000 high schools that were reported nationally, Arabia Mountain is in the 2000s, but 63rd in Georgia. So one of the highest ranked schools in our country. And I know that although he's no longer the principal there, his legacy continues. So congratulations to you, Dr. Swanson, and all of the great work that you do. Again, we're just so proud to be here with our Region 7 community. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our Comprehensive Master Plan Town Hall meeting, or our CMP. We are happy that you've joined us for this very important event. Tonight, as we discuss the Comprehensive Master Plan and field your questions, we hope that we will be able to provide a greater clarity and a renewed sense of partnership for all of our stakeholders. We know that this will serve as a new phase or the second phase of an important partnership between you, our valued stakeholders, and the entire school district. This partnership is important because it serves as another opportunity to provide increased quality instruction, programs, and better facilities for all of our scholars. The Comprehensive Master Plan, or the CMP, and the process touches every aspect of our strategic plan goals. However, we want to lift up goal area 1, student success with equity and access, and goal area 5, facilities. These will be the hallmarks of this project. The CMP is not only a reflection of our strategic planning goals, it is also a stroke on the canvas of our vision for the DeKalb County School graduate. Please understand that the information presented this evening, these will only be recommendations. There are best thinking to date based on our previous community engagement, and these are only recommendations for you to begin to react to. We want to thank you for your time, and we look forward to continued engagement. We look forward to receiving your reactions via the survey and the CMP email that will be shared with you this evening. And at this time, I will turn it over to my colleagues in our Division of Operations, as well as our partners with Perkins and Will. Thank you so much, and thank you again for joining us.
My name is Hans Williams. I'm Director of Planning and East Bos Programming with the DeKalb County School District. And later you'll hear from our partners at Perkins and Will, who have helped develop these options and recommendations for the Comprehensive Master Plan. Let's begin taking a look at what options, what have been developed. And again, I think it's important to reiterate multiple times that these are just options that we're looking at. You'll see as we go along that the phase of the Comprehensive Master Plan we're in right now is one where we still need feedback. We're still developing these options that will become recommendations in the draft Comprehensive Master Plan, where we will garner even more feedback that will become finally the final Comprehensive Master Plan. So first, let me give you a quick sneak peek at what we're going to be looking at here in this presentation tonight. So what you'll see is new buildings, early learning centers in every region, K-8s addressing continuity of instruction, mergers providing extended programs and student support, merging schools together, more resources for instruction for students, and addition of programs to prepare students for the changing workforce. So this is what we're talking about tonight, is the big picture ideas. There's quite a lot that the comprehensive master plan will cover, and not all of that will be gotten into tonight. Tonight, we want to focus on these big ideas, these big options, and so that we can get the feedback on that. A lot of the individual to each school components of the comprehensive master plan will be coming with the draft CMP. And in fact, let me give you a bit of a background into where the CMP came from. Over the last several years, the district has made several moves through redistricting, building new schools, and many other components that speak to the future of where will the district be now and moving into the future? Where do we want to be? What do we want to look like? And so it was decided that we needed to draw all of this together into a comprehensive master plan. So from that, we developed, the idea is to look at not just where are we as a district, but also where do we fit within the greater DeKalb County. Talk to, of course, the school district stakeholders, leadership, our parents, our community members, but also talk to cities and the county and truly look at comprehensively where we want to be in 10 years. And so from that came this idea of the comprehensive master plan. So looking at the next slide here, this is a kind of the task list that we initially developed, all the different components that go into the comprehensive master plan. And I think this is important because it's, especially now, sometimes difficult to remember that some parts of this began all the way back in October of last year. So first came the assessment phase. Many of you are probably familiar with the facility condition assessments, educational suitability assessments, especially in January, February, March, there was a lot around those. And to be honest, some of those may have come out actually too early. And what that meant was that we spent a lot of the past several months going back, revisiting those, making sure that the inventory and assessments, the data on which the CMP is built is sound and is good, and it will make that foundation that we can move forward from. And tonight is where we will show those options about what it will look like, the CMP will look like moving forward. A critical component of the CMP is stakeholder engagement throughout the process, from the very beginning, engaging with the board, with district leadership, and then we had several town halls in January, February, March, and into the spring of this year, talking with the community, talking with community organizations, talking with stakeholders about what is a comprehensive master plan for the district? What will it look like? And then, of course, our last round of town halls in August, talking about East Blast and the importance of the various funding sources that we have for capital improvements. And then tonight, where we really finally take a look at the options and some of the potential recommendations that will be going into the comprehensive master plan. And so that leads us on to, you'll see it here as task 3, the options development. So that's where we are tonight, and that's where we'll be here in this month of October, talking about these potential options, talking about what may become the recommendations for the draft CMP, and all of the different components that go into it, the special programs, new facilities, additions, and potential mergers of schools, the district-wide redistricting and the prioritization of facility condition improvements isn't something that we're focusing on here tonight. We want to make sure that we're focusing on these big ideas, but those absolutely are part of the CMP. You will hear about them, and they will be part of the draft CMP that will be coming out in November. After we get the feedback from these round of October town halls. And then finally, coming out of this, as I've said, is the draft CMP. Will that include an implementation plan, a financial analysis of the recommendations, and then from all of the comments, all of the feedback from the draft CMP to these town halls here in October, the town halls in August, all the way back to the beginning of this process, will all be brought together into the final comprehensive master plan that will be put before the board. So now, to give you an idea of who we've talked to, what we've heard, and all of the different components that have gone into the options and recommendations you'll be hearing tonight, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen Brown of Perkins and Will.
Thank you, Hans. I'd like to provide a quick update on stakeholder engagement, what we've heard, and as well an update on the assessment data. So from the beginning of this process, we've made an intentional effort to solicit input from a wide range of perspectives so that we can develop a more nuanced picture of the district as a whole and the needs of its constituents. In addition to engaging regularly with the school board, district staff, PACs, committees, principals, we've also continued to reach out to a variety of people and groups that are willing to share their perspectives on the DeKalb County schools and what they hope for will result from the comprehensive master plan. We've been steadily ramping up our engagement to build a robust network of champions throughout the county and that we can rely on for the duration of this process. Obviously, if you belong to an organization or group that hasn't spoken to us, we'd love to hear from you and provide feedback. These conversations are ongoing and we value your feedback. And this list here is just a quick snapshot of some of the groups that we've talked to. Go to the next slide, please. Across the district, we've heard a number of problems with maintenance and the frustration with long-term deferred maintenance. It's clear that major investments need to be made in order to upgrade facilities or replace aging facilities, rectifying deferred maintenance issues and eliminating trailers. Given the experience over the last year with remote learning, there's a strong recognition that technology infrastructure needs to be invested. And that will also play a big role in the success of schools as they develop a need and will upgrade across the district. Another frequent theme is the value that parents and families place on the variety and diversity of the school choice programs that are available to students. Many would like to see these offerings expanded in order to make them accessible to more students across the district. Many DeKalb communities lack sufficient supply of quality childhood and early education. So there's a strong desire to have more early childhood education options that would help them prepare the district's children to be successful once they matriculate to elementary school. Go to the next slide. We often hear about the importance of communities and the roles of schools in helping to create a sense of community. Sometimes this has to do with strong correspondence between attendance zones and various municipal boundaries. And in other cases, it simply has to do with the value people place on the role of neighborhood schools. We've also heard from communities that feel left out but desperately want to build a stronger school and community relationship. We believe this desire for community is a strong foundation for the development of the comprehensive master plan. As part of these conversations, we are encouraged to reconsider the current grade configurations and school sizes to increase diversity, limit middle school attrition, and make better use of available seats. DeKalb County is a very diverse and across the district, and we've heard from constituents that want to see diversity reflected in the student populations of the schools. Finally, many would like to see school facilities made more accessible for use by the communities they serve. This could be for after-school programs, adult education, mentoring programs, and sports. Since some school facilities are so prominent in many communities, it'd feel like a shame that if they weren't used more often outside of regular school hours. Our conversations with DeKalb mayors and other municipal leaders indicate that the district could take advantage of more opportunities to work with city and county governments to leverage resources and funding to solve school-related facility challenges. Go to the next slide, please. And throughout this engagement, we pulled a few quotes that really spoke to us about what the master plan means to the community. We talk about equity, facilities, and infrastructure, thinking big, and also the worry about redistricting. Next slide. Also, we want to provide an update where we are with the assessment data. Within the last 2 weeks, we've provided updated versions of the draft reports that have been published to the CMP website. These include the FCA reports, ESA reports, capacity, and school inventory. I'd like to thank all the community stakeholders and regional maintenance staff, PACs, principals, everyone that's been able to provide invaluable input throughout this process. As stated here, these reports will remain in draft form until the final comprehensive master plan is issued. We've received updated enrollment numbers for special programs, and we'll have that report updated and published very soon. Next slide. Regarding the updated FCA reports, we just want to reiterate that, as part of this, it's part of our QA/QC program. These reports now incorporate all the feedback that we received from all the constituents. They've been reviewed internally and externally by the district as a whole. And then what you'll notice as you look at these reports that for the most part, most of the scores have remained relatively the same. Schools in poor condition are still the same, and those targeted for upgrades remain. Next slide. With the updated FCA scores, we've created a graphic here just to show the averages by the cluster and the region, so you can get an overall perspective on how facilities perform across the district. And please note that while these reports are important, they're only one component in a list of many that will inform a prioritized list of needs as we go through this options development. And I'll turn it over to Barbara Crum as well.
Thank you. Stephen's talked a lot about where we are with sort of assessing and hearing from everybody. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we're proposing as recommendations. And just to reiterate what the superintendent said, these are absolutely recommendations. This is our first time presenting to you. You know, we want to think big, but we want you to have input. You've been wonderful all the way through this and had a lot of input. Don't stop now. Let me say there are a couple themes that have continued to rise in all our occasions, and I wanted to share them with you because I think they really give a lot of sort of guidance to the master plan. Change is hard, no matter what, change is hard. And so we're looking at change. We're looking at change all the way across the district. We want to make the district better for everybody and every student. So we know change is hard. The other sort of thing that stuck with us, next please, throughout all of our conversations with everyone is that everyone gets something, but no one gets everything. And what we're trying to do is provide across the district equity. And so we really are listening to everybody and trying to really give something to everyone. Next, please. And last of the sort of big themes I think that I want to leave you with is think big. We really want to deal with big ideas and big things. And many of the things that I'm going to talk about tonight are not totally resolved. They're big ideas and we haven't totally fleshed them out, but we want to put them out there because we think they really will make the district a better district. Let me start a little bit with talking about the goals of the master plan. After Stephen talked about all of the FCAs and the ESAs and the utilization and all the sort of things we put into it, we sort of thought, what are the goals? What do we want to accomplish? And having heard what the stakeholders have said, it seemed to us there were some universal goals. And we really we heard lots about neighborhood schools and how important they were. And we also heard about the fiscal responsibility of the district. So, you know, it's a challenge for us to try and maintain the neighborhood schools while being sensitive to costs. And we continue to have that challenge as we go through the master plan. We also want to maintain neighborhood schools while diversifying the student population. That we heard lots about from the stakeholders. And of course, with the hard data that we got, we want to address the overcrowding. And our overcrowding baseline was really looking at schools that will be over 100% utilization in 2031. Let me remind you too, I should have put on our big slides, this is a plan that's a 10-year plan. We're looking at 2031. So nothing that we're suggesting today is going to happen tomorrow. This is, you know, over the next 10 years. You know, some of it will happen sooner than others, but basically it is a 10-year long-range plan to really make changes in the district. So we're looking at the overutilization of schools that will be over 100% utilized in 2031. The underutilization, schools that will be 70% or less full in 2031, excuse me. And then schools where the facility condition score is below 60%, which is really poor. And those are the ones that we really want to address as soon as possible. And it was interesting, we had a lot of conversation with parents and PACs and even stakeholders from various clusters who weren't parents about looking at different grade configurations. And what really came out of it was that it's interesting that in DeKalb County, the elementary schools are very, very strong and the high schools are very, very strong. And the middle schools are strong, but we lose children in the middle schools. And I think this is true everywhere. I think middle school is tough, but it was pointed out by parents that there seems to be a higher attrition rate in the middle schools than they would like. And so we talked about other grade configurations and we talked about K-8s. We have done a number of K-8s and the superintendent has come from districts where there've been very successful K-8s. So if, you know, a lot of the parents said to us, if you could keep the children in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade with the same social workers, the same counselors, and the same teachers, that it really does keep them in school and as a continuity of instruction that's very successful. So we really looked at K-8s. And then we talked about maximizing the resources. There's a lot of conversation about we're spending a lot of money to upkeep buildings that really are not in very good shape. And shouldn't we be able to spend that money on instruction and expanded programs? So those sort of were the big riding over goals that we would like to deal with in the plan. You know, those are sort of big picture things. There were some other things that sort of drove us in where we looked at how to, you know, either build schools, move schools around, look at some mergers. And they were sort of three factors. And the first one really was building clusters around the feeder pattern. Again, looking at what exists in the district, you have very strong high schools that have about a 600 student capacity and very strong middle schools size-wise that have a 1,200 student capacity. And what that meant is the class coming into 6th grade is usually around 400 students, and that class matriculates all the way through 12th grade. So we have tried to set up the feeder patterns and arrange the elementary schools so they all feed into a middle school with 400 students. So that drove some of our reclustering that we're suggesting. The other thing we looked at early on, you know, you look at the district and there are areas where schools are very overcrowded, and you look at the district where the area where schools are very underutilized. And we thought, you know, can you just send the overcrowded children to the underutilized schools? And in fact, it doesn't work in a district this big. The distances are such that we just came to say, we can't absolutely align the population with the seats with any reason. So we just accepted that there are going to be some geographic discrepancies. And thirdly, we looked at expanding programs. And this was the one where we really did have a lot of conversation. And this is a tough conversation. And we went back and forth and everything, but we're going to recommend some mergers because we really think it takes money that is being spent really to keep up old buildings that really are in terrible condition and don't have a lot of children in them. And it takes it away from program. It takes it away from instruction. And we had a lot of feedback about spending that money on instruction and expanding programs. If you could add more programs and add more staff, you're much better off. So that was really a driver for us. And we sort of did some research on this because we heard you loud and clear about neighborhood schools. And we didn't want to just say, you know, we're going to consolidate this and that. So we went and looked at other districts. And we did find that, you know, most districts with a population of 90,000 students don't have anywhere near 130 schools. And the fact that we did have a lot of small and underutilized facilities. And, you know, when we looked at other districts, they said the reason they had the larger schools was it consolidated their services, and in particular, things like food service and transportation. And that's where some of the great savings was. And again, the larger elementary schools we found got added support people. You get added counselors, added social workers, and sometimes added assistant principals. So there seemed to be reason to get added staff that could really help the students as well as expanding the programs. More art, more music, all the sort of connection programs expand with a larger school. So that was those are sort of all the sort of, as I call them, qualitative drivers, all of the soft drivers. And then we went back next slide. I'm way ahead of you. I'm sorry. I'm not even making you go with me. Go. Next slide. Next slide. And then after those sort of soft qualitative determinants or criteria, we really went back to looking at the data. And basically, next slide, please. We looked at the FCA scores and we looked at the utilization. And I think this is a really interesting map because I think it really shows you very clearly sort of the areas where the schools are under 60% with an FCA score, which means they're in poor condition. And I think they're pretty much spread across the district, but it seemed to us a great number of them were in region 2. So you'll see as we work through this, you'll see some of how we address these. And so I will have in this presentation, it will be up online. Sort of next slide, please. The list of the schools and the lowest FCA scores. So you can begin to see why we address certain ones immediately in the plan. This will be, I know you can't read it, but it will be on the website. The next map, next slide, please. The next map, which I think, again, is really graphically very strong. You can see the schools that will be under 70% utilized and the schools that will be over 100% utilized in 2031. And remember, this is 2031 we're looking at. Some of this is true today, but it's going to be very true in 2031. And you'll see again that the schools that we really need to address, the big overcrowding is in region 1 and region 2 and region 4. That you'll see that's where we have the real growth in the next 10 years. Next slide, please. Again, this will be online and you can see it, but I have really categorized for you the schools that have the biggest overcrowding and the strongest underutilization. So you can see which ones we want to address for the overcrowding and which we want to address for the underutilization. Again, I apologize, you can't see it here, but you will see it online. I think these maps are great too. The next slide, please. These maps are just great visuals, I think, to show you. This is 2030, 2031 utilization. And the first one's the elementary schools, the next one's the middle schools, and the third one is the high schools. So you really can see the migration and sort of where the growth is going to be, you know, across the district in terms of various schools. And it's interesting, the elementary schools begin to grow back again. I lost it. Sorry, forgive me. You'll see the elementary schools, the growth is really throughout the district, and the high schools are pretty much in Region 1 and Region 2 and Region 3 again, where we see that overcrowding. Next one, please. And so with all of this sort of hard data and with all of this qualitative input, we really did come up with some big ideas. And again, let me reiterate, it's 2031. This is not happening tomorrow. And remember, change is hard and nobody gets everything. Next slide, please. You know, as I said to you, the biggest issue, and you saw that in the maps and you've seen it in our numbers, is really the overcrowding in District 1 and District 2. And the overcrowding specifically, I mean, in Region 1, you will see that the high schools will be 50% over capacity in 2031. In the middle schools, Sequoia Middle School similarly. So that really was the first thing that we thought was the most important that we deal with. And what we are suggesting is, of course, you build the new Cross Keys that has been on the table for quite a while and come back and do that, get that project going. But we are suggesting a new cluster in Region 1. Next slide, yes. And in Region 1, we're suggesting that you do a Sequoia cluster, that you build a new Sequoia High School. In the previous plans, there were always additions to be slated for Chamblee and for Dunwoody. And we are suggesting that those are really small sites and it's hard to add a lot of classrooms on those sites. It really maxes out everything that's on there. So we're suggesting build the new high school, build the Sequoia High School and replace the Sequoia Middle School. And to do that, we're suggesting that you consolidate and merge Dresden Elementary School with Cary Reynolds Elementary School. Both of those schools have low FCAs and both of them really need to be replaced. If you merge them on the Dresden site, you have room to build the Sequoia High School and the Sequoia Middle School on the Sequoia site. So we think that that really is hugely successful, that it solves a lot of issues and takes the heat off overcrowding at the high schools in Region 1. We're also suggesting that you make a K-8, that you consider making a K-8 at Austin and a K-8 at the new Dunwoody as it gets built now. And the reason we're suggesting that is for the academic reasons, that all of the pros of K-8s, you know, that really deal with the attrition at the middle school level, but you also right now have seats at those schools. And if we could put a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade at Austin and a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade at the new Dunwoody, we don't have to build classrooms at Chamblee Middle or at Peachtree Middle, and you don't have to really overload those sites. So we think that that's a win-win all the way around. The other school that really has severe overcrowding or will in 2031 is Stone Mountain. So we're suggesting again, you build a classroom addition at Stone Mountain High School. Those were sort of dealing strictly with the overcrowding. The other issue we have is the overcrowding and low scores together. There were some schools that just stood out as absolutely needing to be addressed for both overcrowding and poor condition. So we're suggesting you build a new Idlewood, a new Jolly, a new Stoneview, a new Hightower, a new Ashford Park, and a new Farrington Elementary School. And all of those, you know, we will space them out, but those are all big needs as we looked across the district. Next one, please. And in terms of K-8s, again, to deal with the underutilization, we are suggesting you build at Austin and Dunwoody and Smoke Rise. We're suggesting Smoke Rise because Smoke Rise will take some of the heat off of Tucker Middle, and Tucker Middle really needed some additional classrooms if you didn't do something with the middle school population in that cluster. So Smoke Rise has the seats and it's, you know, it's a very good school to go ahead and look at the K-8 model. We also suggested possibly looking at a K-8 at Indian Creek. One of the things we heard, and you'll see throughout this, is the Clarkston cluster would really like a middle school closer to the high school. It's hard for that population to get the transportation between those two schools. And they would really like the middle school close to the high school. And we can't do that right away in the plan. But if we could put some middle school students at Indian Creek, it would begin to address that issue. So we said, let's add a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade at Indian Creek that's really quite close to Clarkston High School. Similarly, Pleasantdale and Peachcrest also each have extra seats. So we said, again, let's look at those as possible K-8s and begin to do the trial there. Next one, please. And then when we started to look at schools that were either overpopulated or underpopulated, but really in bad condition, we looked at a couple other consolidations. And we're suggesting that you merge Midville and Livesey, and that you possibly merge Dunair and Allgood, and possibly merge Hawthorne and Henderson Mill. And in each of these mergers, we're not at all suggesting that you close the school where we don't build the new school. We're suggesting that those possibly become early learning centers or some kind of program in the district. We do not want to close schools. We just want to make them as vibrant as possible and put the population where we can. We are suggesting building bigger schools, so you'll pick up the population at both those schools easily. And there were a couple other projects that came up as really top priorities as we went through, and they didn't come out of sort of the qualitative things that we've mentioned before or the quantitative data. They came out of other things. And one of the ones was to build a new renovation, a new addition, and a major renovation at Druid Hills. And part of that reason is it's not increasing capacity, but the Druid Hills High School has a building that they use that's an old elementary school building, and it's really not fit for high school students. So we really said, this is the time. It's been there for years and needed to be replaced. We said, this is the time to replace that and really maximize that site over there. Similarly, there was conversation about Stone Mill and Stone Mountain elementary schools, and they're in an area of the district where there are a lot of mobile families. And we really, those kids get pulled out of one school and sent to another school, you know, many times during the year. And we said, if we could build a bigger school that had a bigger catchment area and combine those populations, then kids could stay in the same school the entire school year and wouldn't have to move. And then, as I alluded to before, the Clarkston High School and new middle school project came up of the fact that Clarkston High School is really, the classrooms are too small for the population they serve. And they really would like the middle school nearby because of the lack of transportation for that population. So we really think that's a strong need too. So different reasons sort of ran us to these conclusions. Next one, please. And then the other thing is, Stephen alluded to, we heard a lot about school choice, and we heard a lot about offering other options. And one of the things we heard loud and clear from a number of parents was more career tech opportunities. So we are suggesting three different things. One of them, the middle one there, is to create a career tech academy at McNair. McNair has lots of room. We can do automotive, we can do aviation, we can do a tremendous amount of programs there. It's a great site to do a career tech academy. We're also suggesting a new idea of putting a cyber technology and engineering academy at Towers. Steve and I are working on a school in Alabama that's a cyber school that is terribly popular. Kids, it has a waiting list to get into. And, you know, as children are becoming better and better gamers, they're becoming better at all of the technology. And therefore, this is a very appealing track. And it's also a great track for the workforce. And the other sort of academy that we are suggesting is go ahead and really build the Performing Arts Academy. I know the Performing Arts School has been on the table for at least a decade. There have been lots of proposals for it. And we're thinking at this point, do it at the Avondale High School site, replace that whole site. You have parking, you have room for theater. There are lots of sort of opportunities on that site, and it's centrally located. It's very easily accessible. So we're saying, let's go ahead and really do that Performing Arts Academy. And the fourth thing there, we heard loud and clear from the parents at Wadsworth and Kittredge to please make those go to 4th through 8th grade. And that made great sense to us that right now, 4th through 6th grade, those children are going into middle school in the middle year, and it's hard to be acclimated and to come in when everybody else has been there for a year already. So we definitely think take that through 8th grade and let all those children enter high school at the same time. The other just sort of a caveat there, just to add to the thing, is we heard across the board that, you know, parents, students, everybody would like to have more high achiever programs at all the schools for equity and access. So we are working with the school system to sort of address that. So we just put it out there as we've heard it loud and clear. Next one, please. The other thing I think Stephen or Hans alluded to early on is we're looking at early learning academies and basically early learning centers. We'd like to begin to put one in every region as soon as we could. And you can see at the bottom there, we'd like to put potentially some, when we merge schools at the school that's left, we'd love to turn it into an early learning center. But basically out of the box day one, we'd like to put one in each region. And you can see the list there. So that was sort of the big picture. There are a few other things that I'd like to share with you, but those are the big ideas that I think would really make a huge difference in the district. for in terms of saving money, in terms of expanding programs, in terms of dealing with overcrowding and dealing with underutilization. Just quickly going by region, I'll go through these real quickly. You know, in region 1, as I said to you, we talked about the new cluster, and the new cluster would, thank you, the new cluster would be fed by Cary Reynolds, Doraville United, Dresden, and Oak Cliff. We were suggesting to diversify the population and to sort of get to where our feeder patterns are right, and we get the 400 students going into 6th grade. We're suggesting moving Hightower and the new Dunwoody to the Chamblee cluster, moving Ashford Park to the Cross Keys cluster, and really balancing out the clusters. And then long-term, we're suggesting build the new Hightower, build the new Ashford Park, and you will build the new Dresden with Cary Reynolds to open up the site for Sequoia. Similarly, the K-8s I talked about at Austin and Dunwoody, and the Early Learning Center at Kingsley. And then in region 2, we're suggesting perhaps moving Sagamore Hills to Druid Hills cluster, again, to try and balance out the clusters, and the K-8s at Smoke Rise and Pleasantdale, Early Learning Center at McClendon. And here we're suggesting you build the new Idlewood, do the renovation, I'm repeating myself, at Druid Hills, and the consolidations of Hawthorne and Henderson Mill and Midville and Livesey, and the Performing Arts Center at the Avondale site. In region 3, we're talking about building a new Stoneview. Stoneview was one of the lowest FCA scores, so we'd like to do that as soon as possible and create an early learning center at Pine Ridge. And we chose Pine Ridge because it's the most underutilized. We could put it elsewhere, but that was our first thought. In region 4, we talked about creating a K-8 at Indian Creek and putting the early learning center at Allgood, consolidating Dunair at Allgood. Building the new Jolly. Again, Jolly was one of the lowest FCA scores, so we'd like to do that as soon as possible. And then the high school and middle school at Clarkston. And again, we'd like to put it on the Clarkston High School site. That might not work, so we're thinking about, are there other sites around to do that? And build a new classroom addition I alluded to at Stone Mountain, and then combine the Stone Mountain and Stone Mill elementary schools to do a larger elementary school to have a bigger catchment area. Next one, please. Region 5, we're talking about moving Farrington to the Miller Grove cluster. A lot of people expected it to be there. We're surprised it wasn't there. So we said, of course, we'll put it there. And then again, we chose Rainbow as the early learning center because it was the most underutilized. But again, if there's pushback or whatever, we certainly could look at other schools in that cluster, in that region. And again, building there a new Farrington and a new Chapel Hill schools that both had low FCA scores. And then region 6, looking at the early learning center at Tony, and then creating a K-8 at Peachcrest, and they're creating the Cyber Technology and Engineering Academy at Towers. And in region 5, we're suggesting that you create the Career Tech Academy at McNair. And here we're suggesting you fold in the programs from DeKalb Tech South, which are very successful, but are really oversubscribed. There's not enough room to expand them there. So to make McNair's Career Tech Academy really vibrant, we're suggesting you fold those programs in there. So then just to give you a little bit of idea before I wrap up here, just to tell you, and this is just our first, again, next slide, please. Oh, I went too fast, sorry. I'm going ahead of you. Next slide, please. Just to give you an idea, and again, this may be hard to read, but I'll put it in the online on the PowerPoint. Basically, we sort of looked at a 1 to 2 year, 2 to 5 year, and 5 to 10 year, looking at how to sort of phase these programs. And the 1 to 2 year are things that almost are in the works right now. There are 22 schools where right now we're doing HVAC and roof replacements. The Cross Keys High School really was in the works before, and we think to get that going immediately. And then if we could go ahead and merge Cary Reynolds and Dresden, that would help us get ready for the Sequoia project. And it would be easy to create the K-8s at those schools right now. You could go ahead and make the 5th grade become the 6th grade at Austin, the 5th grade become the 6th grade at Smoke Rise, and work that through. And again, the other project, much like Cross Keys, that's been on the table for a long time, is the Arts Center, the Arts Academy. So we thought if you could go ahead and begin the programming, the concept design, and possible fundraising for that. There was conversation with many people about the Performing Arts Academy about, making it really countywide and really beginning to get fundraisers, public and private fundraisers, and really make it a special school. So we thought we ought to look into that as soon as we start doing programming and concept. In the 2 to 5 years, we were looking at the Sequoia project. We were looking at Druid Hills, possibly the Clarkston, if we could figure out a site for the middle school. And then, as I said to you, the elementary schools with the really poorest condition were Idlewood, Jolly, and Stoneview. So we said, let's get those going first. And Dunair and had a very poor condition. So we said if we could get that consolidated and possibly Henderson and Hawthorne, again, low FCAs, those buildings need to be addressed. And then if we could go ahead and merge the Stone Mill and Stone Mountain, we thought those would be priority projects. And then you could easily do the early learning centers at All Good and Rainbow, the K-8s at Indian Creek, Peachcrest, Pleasantdale, and really get the Performing Arts Center, Performing Arts Academy, the Career Tech Academy, and the Cyber Tech Academy, really get them going as soon as possible and really make a difference to the district. And then a little further out, the 5 to 10 year is across Keys Middle School, the Stone Mountain High School additions, and then the other elementary schools, and the merger of Midville and I got it wrong, Midville and Livesey. I made a mistake there at the Livesey site. Forgive me, there's too many words in there. And then create the early learning centers as those other schools become open. So basically, that's pretty much the plan. And then the other thing I just wanted to throw out here, because I know there was so much conversation about the HVAC and roof replacements, I just wanted you to see 22 of them are already in design or in construction. And Hans and Richard and their team are working right now with really lining up the next group with CARES funding and getting ready for the next project. So we really are trying to address all of the HVAC and roof replacements, as well as other projects that you told us about, that they are really lining up to happen as soon as possible. And finally, just to reiterate, next slide, please. Just to reiterate, what we really are trying to do in summary, we're trying to address the overcrowding, as I said to you, with new facilities, try to address the underutilization and poor facility condition by merging some schools, create new opportunities, create the K-8s, create the early learning centers, increase the diversity and equity by redistricting a bit and changing some feeder patterns, and really trying to expand programs and really be good financial stewards of the district's money. So on that note, let me take you to the last slide. I put an awfully lot out there. As the superintendent said, this is recommendations. This is not the end all be all by any means. I wanted to tell you, we're thinking big. We want to think across the whole district. We're trying to think of new and exciting things that really will improve the education in the district and really have an exciting sort of student body and parent body. So we'd love to ask you which things excite you most about the CMP vision. And we'd love for you to go to the Menti site and put in, any of these things that really seem exciting to you. And if there's others, please add them to them. So see the Menti site. Thank you so much. And please, we are open for questions.
So let's see what questions we have this evening. That was a lot of information. So I know you all have plenty of questions for us. The first question: when you expand Kittredge to 8th grade, is it moving back to the Nancy Creek School where Dunwoody Elementary currently are housing their 4th and 5th graders? What would be the timeline/priority for this?
Thanks, Connie. I'll go ahead and answer that one. We are not looking at moving Kittredge back to Nancy Creek. Nancy Creek, in looking at the different needs, the Nancy Creek facility is absolutely going to be necessary for the district in the future, but not necessarily as the permanent site of Kittredge. However, we also recognize that where they currently are is not set up for even the current configuration of grades, let alone to be adding 3 more. So we are looking at alternative sites, possibly, especially in the 10-year outlook of the CMP, of where Kittredge might end up. The timeline of that will depend on when different facilities become available, because it will depend on when other schools become available, either through merging, like for example, with Livesey and Midvale coming together, the Midvale, or with Henderson Mill and Hawthorne coming together, Henderson Mill, these facilities will be available. They're relatively nearby. There are, of course, things we need to look at with that, but those are examples of the types of facilities we're looking at. And again, the timeline will depend on when those schools will become available, when the new schools that those students will be moving into will be built.
Great, thank you so much for that. Okay, our next question. Why is underutilization at middle schools and high schools not addressed in this plan? Given the number of high schools below 60% utilization, why was there no consolidation for middle schools or high schools?
The question of consolidating middles and high schools is actually something that, I mean, it's been a part of the CMP from the beginning. This recognition that we do have a lot of schools that are below, especially in the 10-year outlook, below 60% capacity, where there's a lot of middle and high school open seats right now. And what we found was that there's absolutely a desire and a need on the part of the district to continue to use these facilities, even if they're not necessarily used as a neighborhood school anymore. And so with that, trying to figure out, well, what are some other uses? What are some things they can be used for? Can they be a school choice school, or can they be some other administrative use? Those sorts of questions we're still going around and around. And I think the big reason why you don't see it in this phase of the CMP, in these options that you're seeing right now, it really comes down to the questions of what do we do with, not what do we do, but what happens to the students when these schools are consolidated? How does that happen? What is the best way for different communities to come together into one cluster? And then how do we make sure that the community, the school that is no longer a neighborhood school, continues to be utilized and continues to serve the community? It was a contentious enough issue. It was something that a lot of people have, for very understandable reasons, have very strong feelings about. And we didn't want it to take away from the conversation of, well, what about these big ideas? What about a, vocational academy at McNair? What about, all of the different big ideas you see, these K-8s? These are big ideas that we need feedback, and we want there to be a conversation about, so that as this moves forward, as the CMP moves forward, we can use these big ideas, use this foundation to begin to address things like the underutilization. But it is something we recognized going into these town halls in October, that there are issues that are mentioned even at the beginning of this presentation that are not fully addressed with the options, and that will need to come to be a part of the CMP, absolutely.
Thank you so much for that, Hans. Okay, our next question. For schools designated as early learning centers, will the 1st through 5th grade students be moved to new schools?
Do you want me to answer, Hans?
Go ahead.
Yes, okay. No, we do long-term plan to move those students to the other schools. That's why some of the early learning centers that we were suggesting are the ones that are the most underutilized. And I think, there's question of, do we choose the right schools or not? But the long range plan, again, is to try and consolidate those children into schools that have seats. It's the whole idea of trying to maximize the seats that we have.
Okay, let's see. Are there any other questions regarding the presentation? I know it was a lot of information to take in. Okay, here we go. How will early learning centers be funded?
I'll answer that one. The primary funding source for early learning centers is the Georgia Pre-K. That's a state-funded program. I believe it's lottery funded, but it is also worth noting that they do fall outside of the traditional K-12 QBE state-funded funding. So a larger chunk than normal of funding for the early learning centers will come from the general fund. It will come from the education taxes that all taxpayers, all property owners in DeKalb County pay. So a certain portion of the district's funds come from state funding. QBE is what it's called. There's a state-funded K-12 dollars that come to the district. And then another portion of the funding comes from the county taxes. In the case of early learning centers, that becomes, rather than QBE, the state funds, it becomes the pre-K lottery program, and then the county taxes making up the rest of it. And it is absolutely true that with early learning centers that, as I said, a little bit more than normal of that will come from the county taxes, as opposed to the pre-K programs that are housed within our normal elementary school facilities.
Thank you, Hans. Yes, pre-K is a really hot topic. Okay, turning Kingsley or other school in the region into an early learning center and the building of the new K-8 school in Dunwoody will likely lead to redistricting. Will you all attempt to time these two events at the same time so that students do not need to redistrict twice?
Yes. The idea with redistricting in any of the areas with the CMP, with the Comprehensive Master Plan, redistricting will happen either with the addition of new capacity or with a major change in programming, or in a way that makes it so that students don't have to be redistricted multiple times. So in the case of Kingsley and up in the Dunwoody cluster specifically, that would very likely happen with the opening of the new Dunwoody Chambly Elementary School, because they'll need to be redistricting around that school as well. So very likely in fall of 2023, there'll be at least an attempt to make sure that any of the major changes, any of the major facility changes we want to happen in that area can all happen at about the same time. So there isn't a need to redistrict either one little part and then another, or redistrict the same school multiple times.
Thank you. I know parents who would be affected by that. I know that parents who will be affected by that would really be concerned. Okay, we have time for one more question. How can elementary schools with K through 8th grade facilitate middle school sports and other activities?
Do you want me to take it? We are looking at converting, because we have extra classrooms and extra seats in the middle schools that we are suggesting turning into K-8s. We are going to do some renovation in those buildings, suggesting that we change enough of the rooms into science rooms so that you can have the whole science program, and do enough rooms into the connections and everything else that is the true middle school program. So you will have all of the middle school program and activities. We are challenged with the sports, and we are looking at properties, and we are looking at, what we can do. All of the schools do have fields, but they don't have regulation fields. So we may have to do some of playing of the sports at some of the adjacent high schools or other middle schools, but there will be practice facilities for kids at all of those schools. But we are very aware of making sure that those schools have the full middle school program.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, at this time, we have just about reached the end of the program. Please know that if you have any questions, any additional questions, please feel free to send them. Those questions will be addressed on the CMP website. I will allow Hans to give you a little more information about where you can post all of those questions. This was a lot of information to take in, so just think it over and send us any questions that you have. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Connie. And you can post the questions on the CMP webpage. There's a few links to it in the chat. You can also find a link to it on the main DeKalb County Schools webpage. If you scroll down, there'll be a link to a comprehensive master plan, and then it'll take you to the CMP's main webpage. On there, you can see there'll be links to all the meetings, of course, and then it says a new CMP stakeholder feedback survey. So that's a wonderful way to give us your feedback, to let us know what you're thinking, to answer the questions, the main question that Barbara posed of what makes you excited about the CMP. And then over and above that, any additional comments or feedback or something that just won't fit in the survey, I encourage everyone who wants to go ahead and send us an email. It's pretty easy to remember. It's cmp@DeKalbSchoolsGA.org. So CMP, like Comprehensive Master Plan, at DeKalbSchoolsGA.org. And that is the catch-all. We get all sorts of feedback from there. We respond to the emails, answer whatever questions we can, add it to the Q&As if we can. So please give us your feedback. Let us know. That's what this phase of the CMP is all about. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams, and thank you again to all of our teammates in the Division of Operations, to our partners at Perkins and Will. Thank you, Dr. Stevenson, for joining us this evening and facilitating the Q&A section. And thank you so much, Dr. Swanson, again, for your leadership. Just a reminder that tonight's focus is really on Region 7, and we want to make sure that all of our Region 7 stakeholders have an opportunity to lift up their questions. So again, Again, we will capture the questions in the chat. We will respond to them. And again, as Mr. Hans Williams shared, as well as Dr. Stevenson, please send in your reactions, your questions via the survey, as well as the CMP email, because we are using that to just kind of identify trends, see what you're most excited about, and what you have questions about that maybe we need to reevaluate. So we're just really excited about continuing with this process. Thank you everyone for your input and feedback and for being community with us this evening. We hope that you have a safe and enjoyable rest of the evening with your families. Thank you.